Hey, great thinkers. I'm Eric Thurwanger. Welcome back to another episode of the Think Great Experience. I've been waiting for this episode for quite some time. I always love to speak with Phil Mackey. Now you get to hear from him today. Phil is a sports talk host, broadcaster. He's one of the stars of the Mackey and Judge show. He's on Purple Daily for Score North. He's been on 1500 ESPN. He is a content director and also, and I'll just stop here, Phil, but a digital content developer for all 8 of Hubbard Broadcasting markets. Just wanted to say thanks so much for being on the show today. And please feel free to chime in a little bit here and let us know if I missed anything.
This is like, you've seen I think it was one of the Rocky movies. I think it was Rocky 3 where Apollo Creed is Rocky's trainer and comes out and he has like 14 different nicknames and credentials and said, just hold on a second. He's almost done announcing my name. So I don't know, maybe I'm like Apollo. I'm like a lesser version of Apollo Creed from Rocky 3, maybe.
Hey, but listen, Rocky wouldn't have been able to do what he did against Mr. T if it wasn't for Apollo. So there's a lot to be said about Apollo.
That's true. And then they killed Apollo off in the next one. So, I mean, hopefully that's horrible. Not foreshadowing for my career, but we'll see.
No, but you can always bring his son into the ring,
and spin off a sequel. Yeah.
Exactly. How great is that? Well, Phil, I know that you've been on the air a long time. You have been in listeners' ears for many, many years talking sports. Can you just give us a little bit of your background? Just share with people who might be out of the Minnesota area for right now, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've been in sports media. Well, I'm turning 36 years old this spring, which is actually still really young in media. I mean, media, oftentimes you don't start to hit your prime in media or as a radio host or whatever it is until late 30s, 40s, sometimes even, guys like Colin Cowherd were closer to 50s by the time they got to their peak, right? So in a perfect world, knock on wood, I'm still just I'm on the upswing still, even though I've been in this industry for half my life. My first ever radio job was calling amateur and play-by-play games for KRWC out in Buffalo, just a small AM station that read obituaries, farm reports, and did sports. And so it's sort of evolved. And you and I both have a mutual connection. One of my bosses here at Hubbard Radio is Dan Seaman. He's our vice president market manager. And as he likes to say, listen, I think Dan's in his late 50s. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but, Dan will say, listen, I'm old enough where I can sort of just ride out the current models of media, FM radio and like the business model as it is without a whole lot of overhaul. I can ride that out. I can retire, go to my cabin and watch somebody else fix media, right?
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, in your mid-30s, you have to deal with the changing and fragmented media landscape for the next 20 or 30 years. And so have fun is what he says.
Anytime you can work in a quote from Dan, it's a good day. But that's absolutely true. I mean, think about it. Radio has been shifting, changing, if you will, evolving. But really, in the last few years, it's like the throttle got pushed forward on where it's headed. And then right now, that's just the media world, but then the sports world with the pandemic, you're talking about 2 industries, media and sports, that have been turned upside down in the last, 12 to 13 months of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on sports itself right now. Where do you see that headed, and how are they going to recover from this deficit? Because they've lost the ability, for starters, the obvious one is putting people in stands right now.
Yeah. Well, so I'll back up to sort of the start of the pandemic and how you just, you mentioned sort of the 2 worlds that I was operating exclusively in, which are radio/media and sports. And those 2 roads were not fun to be on for about 5 months last year. But when the pandemic hit, and again, I'm not going to sit here. I'm still young in this industry. I don't have all the answers. I'm curious. I have thoughts. I have some expertise. And so just from that prism, when the pandemic hit, I was so proud of our team at the time. We knew that we were going to be without live sports. The first part of it, like in March, when I think it was the Utah Jazz game was the first game to get canceled in the United States. And then it was just a waterfall of March Madness, and then the baseball season got pushed, et cetera. And I think we kind of sensed this isn't just going to be a 2-week thing. This is going to be maybe a 2-month or a 4-month thing. And I think there's two ways to go about it, whether you're an actual content creator or whether you're overseeing the business or, you know, whatever role you play in media or in sports media. You could look at it and say, oh my gosh, we're screwed. This is our demise. This is going to expedite the erosion of more traditional platforms like radio and traditional TV cable, right? Or you can look at it and say, all right, well, this is going to be bad for a minute, but someone or multiple people, not many, but multiple people are going to look at this as an opportunity to quickly evolve, to quickly pivot, to use a buzzword from 2020.
Yeah.
And accelerate on whatever the next wave is instead of lamenting what's happening, right? And I think,
Right.
you know, if you just look at the last 15 years, like the social media era of media consumption, the pie chart of what types of media you would consume and how long you would consume each type looks a heck of a lot different now than it did 15, 20, 25 years ago. I mean, like, think about music radio for a second. If you wanted to listen to country music in 1995, you had really two options in your car, right? You could put a cassette tape in of Garth Brooks or whatever it is that you were going to listen to, or you turn to one of maybe two local radio stations, probably only one in some markets. That if you want to listen to country music, this is the one spot if you don't have a cassette of your favorite band that you can listen to it now.
That's right.
And then that same pie chart now in the car, even like radio and the car are still very much friends, but now the car has said, all right, this is no longer a monogamous relationship radio. Yes, you can still listen to the country music station, but we've brought Spotify into the relationship and Apple into the relationship. And so I think long-winded answer longer, I think looking at the way people consume media, whether you're in music or sports or news talk or whatever genre of media you're in, looking at the way that people consume content, finding ways to reach those people, and then looking for ways to connect advertisers to those audiences or finding different business models. Like, there are no concrete answers right now, but I think you have to, as long as you're curious and you're looking to be relevant, you can emerge from what was a pretty crappy year with at least some blueprint going forward.
Well, I think when it comes to media, you know, I'm 51, so of course you get in the car and you want to listen to your favorite radio station, but then if you travel like I do, when you go out of your range, you lose your station, but you don't lose anything anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, as long as you're somewhat tech savvy or have a child that knows how to program everything for you, you know, you really are in control of much more. It gives us options. But, you know, one of the things that was exciting working with you, working with the Hubbard team, is when we would be in our think tank session. So we would have a think tank. And I remember the one that we had in Minneapolis, very confidential meeting as we were talking about Score North. Mm-hmm. And this was very kind of state of the art, cutting edge to have streaming and sports. How did you start to come about? And I know this idea was brewing back there for a while, but how did you know it was the right time to start streaming sports, or that it was the right time for Score North? Because what you guys are doing on Score North right now is really unprecedented. I mean, you're having tremendous success with this. Can you just tell us a little bit about that history of Score North? Yeah. And how that led to some of the greatness that you guys are experiencing there at Hubbard Broadcasting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words. I mean, some of it is just born out of what the audience demands. And unfortunately for a lot of AM radio stations, which is what, that's how I built my talk career off, AM 1500 in the Twin Cities. I believe on May 20th of this year, we'll celebrate 93 years of a broadcast license. So we're talking almost it was the first ever station to broadcast radio in Minnesota or in the Twin Cities. And so, for decades and decades, AM radio was relevant, if not thriving. And with all of the different things that we've talked about the last 15 years, just the amount of people that are in the AM radio shopping mall has decreased quite a bit. You can put the best programming out ever, and
that's right. If
the sound quality on FM is better, or if the customization of listening experience is better on a podcast app or on a music app, it's just, you're sort of fighting a battle that you can't win. And so we looked at that Rubik's Cube and said, as a business, and said, well, let's take a step back. What are we really doing here? We're not just doing AM radio. Like, let's take a step back from there. Yeah. AM radio is our distribution vessel to reach an audience. Well, there are other distribution vessels out there as well that are reaching maybe even bigger audiences than AM radio, have bigger potential or reach younger people, right? So let's really rethink the way that we construct our content and business model to be brand first, distribution second, and then from there we can more easily change direction if an app pops up that is gaining popularity, YouTube or Clubhouse or whatever it is. Like, we aren't beholden to just being all in on one form of distribution. So Score North was born out of really necessity, that if we want to be relevant as a Minnesota-based sports content company, we need to reach. I mean, AM radio is not getting a lot of 25-year-olds jumping in the demographic to say, I'm going to try AM radio today. No. It's going to be great.
No. Well, one time I pointed out to my daughter, we were driving and there was an old payphone. She's 14, going to be 15 this summer. And she actually said to me, what is that? And I said, oh, that's a payphone. And she says, well, how do you use that? What does that mean? And I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, times have really shifted.
Yeah, so you go stand in this weird small booth in the middle of a seedy area of the city, probably,
and you need a quarter. You need a quarter. Or if it's your parents, you call collect and hope they accept the call. But the funny thing is, then she looked down and she says, well, what's that? And I said, oh, well, that's a phone book. And she said, oh, well, what's in there? And I said, well, you would have your phone number and address in there. And she goes, that seems really stupid. And I said, thinking back, it was kind of stupid, but you were excited to see your name and a phone number. Maybe if you look back on that Steve Martin movie, The Jerk, remember he got so excited. Yep. And yet I'll bet with her, she doesn't hop in the car to put on a station. She hops in my car and it's connecting her device.
Yeah.
Actually it's unplugging my device. Let me back up. She takes my device out, plugs in hers. and I actually learned how to use my device in my car because of her. And now once you have the control, it's powerful. But when you first start launching this idea, you had to be met with some resistance where people are like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this will work. And yet now you have levels of success that are expanding. Score North expands beyond just Minnesota.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just to sort of like put a bow on the construction of Score North, and by the way, we've only been around for 2 years, so we really have built this Minnesota focus. Now we have all kinds of Vikings fans we have Vikings fans from Frank in Italy. We got Vikings fans and Michael in Australia. I can think of these guys that jump on our post-game shows. So, but our core really business is targeting Minnesota fans and also businesses in terms of advertising partners. But it really was, let's create Minnesota sports content and entertainment for a Minnesota-based audience. But the biggest change was both philosophically and production-wise was for the relevant platforms that people are consuming content on in 2018 or 19 or whatever the year was, we started conceptualizing this. And so that means we need to be producing content as if our life depended on it for Instagram, for YouTube, for podcast, and still for radio, because radio is still, a huge part of our business model. You don't just like flush all the revenue that you have down the toilet to start from zero. That's not how it works, right? So really it was, I think the skepticism was more born out of, okay, well, how can you build a YouTube channel from zero, or how can you build a podcast network from zero? Are you really going to get enough numbers to justify this? And it's like, I remember sitting in a room, and this might've just been a blind luck guess on my part. I'd like to think there was an educated guess behind it, but I remember looking at our sales team in 2019 in a sort of a strategic meeting about, we've rolled out Score North. This is our content plan, Minnesota sports, anytime, anywhere, whether you're 25 or 55, we will program content for you. So if you're 55, maybe you catch us on AM radio. If you're 25, maybe you catch us on podcast, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, etc. And I remember sitting that meeting, and I got on a roll, right, explaining the mission statement, and we're more than just a radio company. We are a content creation company. We work hard, this. And I said, and I'll bet you in like 2 or 3 years from now, for sure 5, we will be much more a YouTube company than a radio company. You watch. And the room looked at me like, whoa, oh my gosh. And I am pleased to say that today, as we sit here on April 5th, 2021, as we record this episode, that YouTube has become our biggest audience now as of the last couple of years. Now, some of that is like during COVID, unfortunately, the company had to reduce staff on the live radio side.
Sure.
And so we're not putting out like 10 hours of local radio content. Some of it's just like going all in on those platforms, but it just kind of shows you in 2021, if you're a sports fan between the ages of 18 and 34, 18 and 44, you are much, 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 much more likely to consume content on YouTube or podcast than you are on AM radio. Yeah. And so it's up to us to go to them as opposed to trying to desperately plead with them to come to us.
That's right.
If that makes sense.
You know, I remember being in some of the creative sessions, and it was exciting because you weren't just trying to repurpose the old way. You were actually creating something new and exciting. And that very first session that I sat in with some of the big players for Score North, we spent hours just focused on the mission. And that collaborative side that's needed right now. I don't even think it's limited to media or sports. I think collaboration in general, everybody needs to collaborate now as we're coming out of the pandemic and what I've called the great transition. We're in this transition phase that'll lead us to this great new era, but we got to get through the transition phase first. But let me ask you this. I know how instrumental you are at Hubbard Broadcasting, not just for Score North, but in all of their markets when it comes to the digital content. What was the impact on the team when an idea like Score North started to take off? How did that impact the people that you work with? And you have a team. So you have a team of people. You had people coming to you in a time period when radio was showing some signs of declining. What did that do for the environment when Score North started to do what you thought it would do?
Yeah, it felt like a startup. You know, it really did. It felt like, all right, in the Twin Cities, we're going up against all these legacy TV stations. And in terms of just like, it's not just radio versus radio. It's literally attention, whatever might be taking up someone's attention. It could be, we considered ourselves competing with the Star Tribune, with K-Fan, the other sports station in the Twin Cities, with TV stations. I mean, it was, obviously we were an audio centric production company, but and still remain mostly audio centric. But the vibe in the room, so to speak, was, all right, it's very cavalier. We're doing something. We're trying to create the model for local sports content. No one else is really doing this around the country in a top 20 market. And so it felt like a startup. Now, I will say it was such a weird second year, and that, after 15 or 18 months of being in existence and gaining much momentum, COVID hits, wipes out a bunch of radio revenue. Our runway got shorter in the meantime, and then our staff was reduced by like 80 or 90%. And so we took the remaining staff and said, all right, well, didn't see that coming. I guess kind of saw it coming after COVID hit, but like didn't see that coming big picture.
Yep.
And so what can we do now with a smaller staff and maybe a smaller amount of resources and real estate? How can we hyper focus and push this thing forward? And so we went from, I want to say 13 different podcasts down to 5, 2 daily ones. And we said, let's just pour all of our energy into these. And it's really, I mean, it's kind of like the board game Risk, right? Well, whatever resources you have, sometimes it's better to just hyper focus on one territory or one cluster or whatever, right? And so hyper focus was a big part of it. And then the last year, even with a smaller staff, I think seeing the results pay off and seeing the numbers grow and seeing new advertisers come on board and are pleased with the integration into audiences, and it gives people a really rewarding feeling that they're creating something new and they're paving a path, and it's a blast. I'm a startup guy at heart. I've been involved in a couple, and I just love that feeling of David versus Goliath, and you're pushing a rock up a hill, and I'm very much more a starter, I think. Well,
in that sense, when you have a startup, then you're like Rocky from the first Rocky going against Apollo Creed, right? So
exactly, yeah. And that's what I do. I like to run around the city in my gray sweats too, and
why not, right? People need that. They need to see that. Maybe we just need to find the right steps for you to run up in Minneapolis. But what a great win for your team. And let me ask you this. I know anytime you have that impact, right? It drives you more, and you feel that enthusiasm, the excitement with the team. especially when you're in a worldwide pandemic that lasted way longer than any of us thought.
Mhm.
But what has the feedback been from the fans, from your listeners? Because you're impacting people who have followed you for many years.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm sure that you have listeners that aren't afraid to express their opinions to you. And
Yeah.
so with Score North, how have you seen their opinions shift from the beginning to where it is right now?
Yeah. The last 6 months or so, maybe more like 8 months, going back to the beginning of last year's Viking season. And again, like this part of it for Score has been with a much smaller staff. And so it's been a lot more intimate in that we're producing 2 daily shows now, Mackey and Judd and Purple Daily. And then we've got some weekly shows that also do well. But the bulk of our attention is on 2 daily shows under the Score North umbrella, Mackey and Judd and Purple Daily, which is a daily 365 day a year daily Viking show.
Awesome.
And sometimes the feedback is, you said what about Kirk Cousins? I disagree. You're an idiot, right? But like in terms of feedback about the brand, the most gratifying feedback has been the countless people that have said something along the lines of, I just discovered you guys for the first time 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 1 year ago on YouTube, on Spotify,
Wow.
on the Score North app, right? Like these pieces of technology and distribution that weren't even at all in my consciousness when I started doing this in 2010 at 1500 ESPN on a daily basis. Like, so our plan was, let's create content and produce it where people consume it in 2020, 21. They will in turn find it. They will like it, hopefully, if we're doing a good job with it. And then they will become part of our ecosystem and part of our community. And to have so many people say, I didn't know you existed 2 years ago, which it stings a little, right? Like, what do you mean you didn't know? I've been around for 10 years in this market, right? But to put out that plan and to have seen such just amazing growth in these areas that we set out to grow, it's very validating, and it shows that you just have to you just have to be a little bit more curious than maybe you were 10 or 15 years ago, because quite frankly, if you could just flip on your radio station switch 10 or 15 years ago, that might have been good enough. And that was a great era too. But now I think you gotta work for it a little bit more in today's audience climate.
What's your thoughts on just being able to pull people together to collaborate right now? You know, we live in a time where we're kind of coming out of the pandemic. So we got this great obstacle. We've had civil unrest. We've had a political year unlike anything we've ever seen. You know, people have been pulled thin for a long time. And yet, in order to make something like Score North work and all the platforms you're on, and the platforms coming, I mean, we're going to see more and more and more show up. How important, question one, how important is collaboration? And question two, how are you getting those innovative ideas out of people during a time when many people are stressed, they feel uncertain or feel fearful or anxious?
Mm-hmm. I'll answer the second part first, because I actually think when you don't really have a choice but to innovate, like when you see that the thing that you've been doing for a long time is either eroding or dying, or you can see the writing on the wall, meaning AM radio for us. I think it just like it becomes a little easier to innovate because you don't have anything to lose, right? I mean, it's harder to if you're sitting on top of a wildly successful entity or a model that's bringing in X amount of revenue and your profit margins are great as a business. Hey, we need to start thinking about innovation here. Well, we do, but we also have to be a little bit careful that we don't take away from the successes we're currently having. I mean, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts is Dan Le Batard, and he actually just left ESPN about 3 months ago, and he's on his own now, and it's the most listened to sports podcast in America. He partnered with former ESPN president John Skipper, and now they've created Meadowlark Media. So it's a standalone media company, and they're bringing in different partners. They brought in a couple former Saturday Night Live writers to be part of their podcast stable, et cetera. And I think it was on one of these episodes where they talked about at Microsoft. Steve Ballmer is one of the founding fathers of Microsoft, and now he owns the LA Clippers. He would shoot down a lot of ideas that turned out to be huge hits for other companies. Like he shot down a smartphone prototype, 10, 12 years ago. He'd shoot down different things because why would we want to devote attention and resources to these other things when we have a core? Now, Microsoft's been fine. Don't get me wrong. Like they've done fine.
Yeah.
But I think for them, it was like, I don't know if we need to take a chance on this thing that another company might start, because we already have something successful. When the thing that you're doing is eroding, it just becomes a lot easier and more necessary to innovate. And so from that perspective, on the collaboration front, I've learned a lot from you. Just full disclosure for the audience. I mean, I just pulled it open here. I still have a list of just either through our conversations or like you've been very instrumental in as a young leader myself. I think we met when I was in my late 20s. And so I literally have a bullet point list of like 15 different, just one sentence or fragment reminders when it comes to team building and personal leadership. And so I want to read a few of them off, A, to suck up to you because I'm on your show right now.
Please.
But B, I think it answers your first question of like, collaboration, the importance of collaboration. And I think what you're really asking too is team building and what goes into getting the most out of people, et cetera. Culture is limited by your tolerance for poor performance. People notice if others aren't holding up their own end of the bargain. I mean, you don't have to be evil about it, but I think, but demanding a certain level of performance or excellence is very important. But the one that stands out the most on here is facilitating the success of others, and really thinking of it in terms of, okay, this person's a producer, this person's a host, this person has these strengths, these weaknesses, really feeding into the strengths, helping to mold weaknesses if you can. But if you can treat everyone on your team as someone who needs to be empowered and put in the best possible position to be the best version of themselves professionally, and if you can hyper focus on what it takes to unlock those things in each person, then I think a lot of the other stuff comes naturally, like the collaboration and respect and innovation. And like, if you can really focus on people and connecting and curiosity, right? Like, and listening to people. And that's the one that has really stood out the most to me as we've built this. And I've taken a lot of this stuff from you and the discussions we've had. So thank you for that, Erik.
Well, thank you for bringing that up on the show. I will definitely have you back to get some more of my quotes from you. But you know what's interesting is I feel, and I know you went through our 12-month deep dive leadership program. There was a lot that you've been through from a Think Great standpoint. I feel that the pandemic, that this obstacle that we faced, and even this transition coming up, this is when leaders are needed the most. So it's not a matter of just having a bunch of one man or one woman shows inside an organization. Just as in sports, in sports, we get it that teamwork is always critical, that even the best team can lose to the worst team when the players aren't cohesive. But I really believe that the pandemic, whether it's media, whether it's sports, it doesn't matter if it's retail or construction, has really shown us the importance of leadership, teamwork, collaboration. I feel that the pandemic has broken the status quo for many people. You see who's who. And one thing that I've loved, I mean, we've talked many times over the years, but even through the toughest of times, you pull the team working side together. You're focused on building teams during those collaboration sessions. And I feel that oftentimes during the chaos, people forget about team building. It's one of those things where we'll get to that later, even though that's when you should get to it now. When a team is losing, right? Fourth quarter, they're down, whatever it is, that's when you're supposed to rally the team. Yeah. I think a lot of businesses are waiting to rally, and that's a huge mistake right now.
You know what? I was on a call earlier in the year when and now thankfully, radio revenues are starting to really rebound, and it's a lot more of a, all right, light at the end of the tunnel feeling right now. But
yeah,
I was on a call with one of our markets. I won't get too specific, but I was on a call with one of our markets, and the revenue outlook in that particular moment, in that snapshot in time, wasn't that great. I mean, it was like, man, we're still digging out of this COVID hole, and we still need to grow. It was very much a grind it sort of feeling. And the market manager opens the call with, all right, we're going to start out with the icebreaker of the week. So he does icebreakers off the top of the call. And we're going to start with so-and-so, and you're going to explain to us what your favorite movie of all time is. And then we literally went around, like there was an hour-long call, and we went around the room for at least a third of that. And everybody with a glow on their face told the rest of the group what their favorite movie was, you know? And it might sound like a super small thing, but I just love the fact that it wasn't an icebreaker. It dropped everyone's guard. And sometimes it's hard to start meetings, right? How do you start a meeting? You just jump in?
That's right.
All right, we're going to talk about this now. And so it lifted the tension. It made everyone laugh and smile. And it was an amazing, small little team building thing that I'll never forget. And so I 100% agree with you on, sometimes you think that, oh, that's not as important as making sure that we have a plan for this thing right now that has revenue attached to it. It's that's like, right. Yeah, but if you don't zoom out from the grind sometimes and focus on the fun or the team building aspect of it, then you're going to wind up losing your team anyways, right?
I agree. And well, first of all, I'm going to starting my meetings off. Since I'm a movie guy, I went to USC's film school. I worked in the movie industry. I'm going to borrow that one, and I'm going to start every meeting off with, let's talk about your favorite movie or a scene. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it really puts you back into, we're always in the people business. And this is when our people need us the most. You know, and it's not just if there's a declining radio audience. Yes, they need you during that time period. But during this pandemic, we need leaders who can stay positive, who can stay focused, who can pull something out of us like that. But it does kind of make me think about one question. Since you were on that call, did you share your favorite movie?
I did. Actually, it's a tie for me. Okay. Shockingly, one of them is Rocky IV. Rocky IV is my favorite. Just anytime it's on, I'm in. I've seen it 250 times, whatever, in my life.
Love it.
But my other favorite movie is a little bit more obscure. It's one of Matt Damon's first big movies. I think this actually he's probably like 2 or 3 big movies under his belt, but Rounders from 1998, okay. The poker movie that came 5 years before the big poker boom in 2003. I have a big poker background. And so Rounders and Rocky IV are my 2 favorite movies. What about you?
Both with an R. Well, for starters, I saw Rocky IV in the theater when it came out.
Wow. And standing ovation at the end when he ended the Cold War.
Yes. And everybody was chanting USA, USA, USA. And then I don't know, right after that, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. So
wow,
that was an impactful movie. You know, it's interesting, when I work out, I listen to the Rocky IV training montage.
Yes,
I have it.
Dude, I'm with you. I will say the best stuff. So I have the whole soundtrack, and I've listened to that in phases, you know, for 20, 25 years. Yeah. But the best workout song on that track is Robert Tepper's No Easy Way Out.
There's no easy way out.
It's the car scene where he shifts gears about 100 times, very unrealistically, but like,
was he driving the Lambo too, wasn't he?
Yep. Which, by the way, if I must say, so you're telling me that Rocky Balboa comes out of retirement and he decides to fight a Russian killing machine who's on steroids on Christmas in Russia for no money whatsoever and doesn't tell his wife about it until he gets home from the press conference? Rocky, I don't know, man. You might want to.
He is a true hero then, I guess. How do you keep that? I mean, we've known since Rocky 1 that he was a man of few words, but yeah, he did keep that. Well, you know what? It just goes to show you the power of teamwork. When Ivan Drago killed off Apollo Creed, it really lit a fire in Rocky. You know,
it really did. Yeah.
And you know, they had a common enemy at that point now, and he even got Apollo's trainer to get in his corner. It was a win-win.
He did. So, they lifted logs and boulders in a cabin in Russia somewhere.
You know, living here in Minnesota, I always think about training outside when it's 20 below until it gets 20 below. And then I say, you know, I'm going to hit the gym. So Rocky was a true stud for sure. All right. So I think you asked about my favorite movie. All-time favorite for me is Conan the Barbarian, the original with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Wow. Man of few words. He was a man of few words at that time too in that movie.
Yeah, to crush your enemies. You know, for me, it really paralleled his life too. When you're looking at him rising up, and you know, whether it was steel or pumping iron, I've always loved that movie. And I know it didn't win a lot of awards, but for me, it's always been that movie that just gets me pumped up. So we got Stallone and Schwarzenegger. All these years later, we're talking about their movies.
I'll give you, if you ever want just a good mindless binge. So from the start of the pandemic last year, all the way through about December, on Friday episodes of Mackey and Judd, we did action movie rewinds, and there are at least 3 or 4 Arnold movies in there. True Lies. We actually did Kindergarten Cop too. Okay. And then I don't know, one of we didn't do Predator, but there's a he went on a nice little run there for about 15 years.
Oh, he did. The year that he did Predator, I went and saw that at a special screening in Westwood, California when it came out. And then he got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And don't tell anybody this, but I ditched school. A buddy of mine, Joe DiBenedetto, and we ditched school and we went and saw him get his star on the Walk of Fame. And right after he got it, I was kind of close. He was fenced off. And I yelled out, "Arnold!" And he looked over and I gave him thumbs up and I got a thumbs up back from Arnold. So it was really awesome.
I thought you were going to say, and he picked me up by the neck and he threw me through a brick wall.
And any Arnold fan would gladly take that.
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy. Then in 87, I went into boot camp and I graduated on November 13th, the night that the Running Man opened up. And so my family had tickets ready. The night I graduated boot camp, I went and saw Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Running Man.
I have never seen the Running Man, so awesome. I'll have to add that to our list.
It's great because it could happen today more than it could have happened back then. It was set in the future. For some weird reason, it's probably got to be 2021 it was set in. You never know. But yeah, good stuff. But, going back to what that market manager did, this is the time for us to add depth to our leadership. I mean, our people need it the most. I mean, even if you look at sports teams, performing in empty arenas is a mindset. Sports is always so much a mental game, but I think business right now is a mental game, regardless of the industry we're in. And not enough leaders are performing like coaches, and they really have to get into that mindset.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing. I mean, you and I always used to talk about, and this principle sort of applies, but there's working in the business and there's working on the business, right? And I think it's so easy to work in the business all the time because it's your day-to-day tasks. It's the admin duties that you have. It's just like the conveyor belt of work that is in front of you every day. Yep. And especially in media, in the business stuff in media, because there's just smaller staffs now and there's just like resources are spread more thin. And so your in the business plate is so full all the time in media. And I think probably for a lot of people in other industries too, but the on the business stuff, if you can get, I'm a firm believer that if you can get the framework and the structure right, and then the vision and the mission right, and get people bought in through any number of different ways of communication, right? Get that framework, get the on the business framework right. The in the business stuff then answers itself and takes care of itself.
You just touched down on a hugely important word, vision. I've been preaching vision for a long time. And when you preach it during the good times, people will agree, yeah, I should share vision more. I should share vision more. How important has it been for you within the media world, within your team, to share vision, a hope for a better future? I mean, right now, when the present is so challenging, I would say that vision is probably one of the most important things that we could share, regardless of what industry we're in.
Yeah. And vision for us is going to be a lot less in magnitude than vision for if you are a governor running a state during a pandemic or something, right? There's different levels of vision and importance of vision and whatnot. But like for us, the vision came down to, okay, the platform that we currently are creating content on is mostly older people that are moving outside the advertising demographic. So the vision can be simplified as we need to reach and entertain and build community among 18 to 44 or 18 to 34-year-old Minnesota sports fans. That's the vision. Entertain those Minnesota sports fans every single day.
So then every goal that you're setting is in alignment with that vision.
Yep. And that's it. Like to me, there's mission statement, but then there's mission and vision can be maybe two separate things. But if you can, in either case, if you can have it in your head when you wake up every day, and this could be, I mean, maybe your vision is, or your mission statement is, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, right? Well, then every action that you take not every action, you gotta sneak in some ice cream once in a while, but like most of the actions that you take are going to align with that, right? So if you wake up every day and you say, I'm going to entertain Minnesota sports fans wherever they consume content. Well, all right. Are you talking about the Dallas Cowboys on a platform that's not relevant? Then you're not falling within the vision, right?
Well, I at least like that you give some grace for ice cream. I mean, anytime you're losing weight, you have those guilty pleasures. But then again, it gets back to something I really believe in, which is it's about progress, not perfection.
Sure.
And I think if we can keep taking steps forward and upward, we're going to be okay through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta, and you don't have to get too deep into it, but sports. When you think about sports in the last few years, there's been some Ivan Drago sized punches that have come in. The 2150 pounds per square inch.
That's right. Yeah.
2150, right?
250,000 pounds per square inch, or whatever it was.
I love that he just jumped so high so fast. It was awesome. You've got not just the pandemic, which has had an impact because teams are separated from their fans. Mm-hmm. So this had to have felt like a completely different year in sports, games canceled and what have you. But also too, in sports in the last few years, you've seen politics come in. So we've got the pandemic and politics. Just from your perspective, how does all that impact the fans? When I go to, when I listen to the governor speak, I'm not expecting him to play sports. So when I watch sports, I'm not expecting anything political. And I'm not saying anything's right or wrong here. I'm saying
for sure
there's a reality that the pandemic and politics, it's a pretty powerful 1-2 punch right now. How has it impacted the fans?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say a little bit, just because I think we need to see if we get 2020 and 2021 under our belts, was there a noticeable decrease in the audiences or the crowd? And to me, I think a lot of people have voiced some displeasure over, I want my politics separate from my entertainment, right? And which, by the way, like that's never really been the case. I mean, go back to Muhammad Ali, changed his name and was making.
That's right.
Like he took a stand against the Vietnam War. And so there's like, this isn't just a 2020, 21 thing. I mean, it was certainly amplified, and there are certainly, I think, more issues coming together at like a 4-way intersection here.
And social media helps to make it
exactly
in our face all the time. Sure.
It amplifies for sure. And so like personally, I have wrestled with the art and the artist, right? Whether it's music or sports, when you find out that the team or the player or the musician or whatever it is either has maybe viewpoints that are opposite of yours, right, or says something that is controversial or inappropriate or whatever it may be, to what degree do you separate the art from the artist?
Right.
And I try to create some separation myself as a sports fan and a music fan.
Sure.
I understand that it's hard. I think it's unrealistic, and I think it's unproductive to ask people with huge platforms, athletes or entertainers, right, to just keep a muzzle on it, right? Like, I think part of the thing that makes this country great at its greatest potential is the fact that people can speak their minds and people have opinions. But I think that to me, the biggest misconception or misperception is that sometimes people get the First Amendment wrong, which is, well, what do you mean you can say anything you want? Well, you can say anything you want, but like, doesn't mean that you aren't going to face some sort of consequence, whether you're an athlete or a politician. And so I almost feel like in the grand scheme, the last couple of years, even though it's been uncomfortable and a lot of people have had their entire worldview and paradigm sort of shattered in their faces.
Yeah.
I think it has opened up a lot of potentially great and productive discussions that could be had. And I think we're still trying to figure out, as a country and people and sports and music, how entertainment platforms play into this. We're still trying to figure out how to have these conversations and how to listen to people. But my stance has always been, if somebody is reaching out in some way and someone feels extremely strongly about something, or they feel wronged in some way, who am I to not listen to them? Yeah. Let's at least get to the core of why you're upset in some way, and then let's have a discussion on that level rather than dismissing the fact that you are upset. So that's how I personally view the last couple of years in terms of everything that's happened publicly.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. A lot of people ask me, just having served, like, well, what do you think about this? Mm-hmm. I said, well, I took an oath to defend our Constitution. It's right in the oath. It doesn't say anything other than, I do solemnly swear to defend our Constitution. So I may not like everything I hear. I may not agree with everything I hear, but I want to be able to hear it. And that's just my opinion. I don't agree with everything or everyone, but when you take an oath to defend something, it's carte blanche. Now, people have the right to burn the flag. People have the right to take a knee. People have a right to do a lot of things that I may not do personally, no matter what the issue is. And I may not agree with that form of it, but people should be able to do it. And so, and like you said, people think they can say anything because of the First Amendment, but you can't go into a crowded building. Not that there's many crowded buildings right now, but you can't go in and yell fire. So even the First Amendment, there's some limitations to it. You can't say certain things about a president you don't like if there's a threat, somebody's going to come visit you. So the point is that I'm glad that you shared that, because it might give people some context. I think some things are done to boost likes or to boost attention or to boost payroll or to boost something, maybe not necessarily to share the truth, but there's some truth out there if we search for it.
Yep. I would say, and this is like, I feel like there's a whole separate podcast that explores the street that we're on right now. And I love exploring the street that we're on right now. But so I'm a guy that grew up in rural Minnesota. I grew up, I went to Buffalo High School. I grew up on a 7-acre hobby farm, and I grew up going to school with 99.9% white people.
Yeah.
And that's my upbringing. I went to college downtown Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota. I've been involved in professional sports and have been around all sorts of minority athletes and people that work in organizations the second part of my life. And so I feel like I'm not an expert by any means, but I feel like I understand multiple points of view when I sit here and I hear some of these discussions, and I think we lack empathy and understanding so much today that and some of it's just the social media vacuums that we all operate in. And it's like, okay, if you're rural America person that feels like you are being left in the cold and you feel like every election is decided by 2 counties in every state. I mean, I hear you. Like, you live a totally different life than someone who lives in downtown Minneapolis or North Minneapolis or whatever, right? I hear you, and you should be heard and empathized with. On the flip side, there's a lot of people that live in really, really bad areas of inner cities that didn't choose to be born there. And if you start to untangle and unpack the history of why their family is in the financial situation that it's in, it's a lot more complicated than pull yourself up by the bootstraps and figure it out, right? I mean, there's a lot of systemic things that have happened much long before you were born, long before I was born, and a lot of people don't want to empathize with that either. And it's like, we can't, listen to people, empathize with people, and really hear where they're coming from. And then we can have actual productive discussions about how to build bridges.
Well, and I think too, when you look at social media, there's so much getting posted that's from a bad place. There's so much anger and hatred about this group of people, whatever that group is, that it just puts the divisiveness even deeper. And what's interesting is I have friends that have very different political views than I do, or different views about certain situations. But when we can talk, then you can have that understanding. And then together you can find some areas to make an impact. I've always believed that whatever I'm passionate about, I just want to take action on it. We started a foundation for military spouses, and we just wanted their cause to get out there. Most people don't think of them on a daily basis, and yet they're there. And they help hold our entire armed services together. So they're really important glue, but we don't hear enough. So I thought, I'll take a stance. And I'm not saying I'm doing anything, life-threatening, but we started awarding scholarships as to help them. I think it's so important we get back to having free speech, but also being able to listen. Let somebody have the free speech, be able to say it in an intelligent manner, and share our thoughts so that maybe we could help our fellow person out. I'm just big into the action side, and there's too much. I found people are posting stuff about what they hate, not about the actions they want to take. And there's a lot of, I call them post warriors. I'm on a mission today. I'm going to post this. I found a post, somebody else wrote it, but it supports my narrative, and I'm posting it. If you don't like it, screw you. And I'm not your friend anymore.
The other thing too is, like, and I know it's hard because there's not as many face-to-face conversations now as there was 2 years ago. Hopefully we can all get back to being in crowded places again. But like, people speak to each other and present their points much differently on social media than they might if in a discussion over a beer with someone that they disagree with, right?
That's right.
And obviously you can't make people interact with, like, I love social media, and I think sometimes social media gets a bad rap because of the way that we use it sometimes. But like, one of the biggest problems with social media, and Facebook in particular, is that you can literally build in just a vacuum and an ecosystem of validating views, right? Like,
that's correct.
You can
Absolutely.
literally block and mute people that disagree with you, and the algorithm of served content feeds off of the things that you engage with the most. And so people wind up in these echo chambers on social media without actual discussion back and forth. And that becomes problematic.
Well,
too.
it can certainly conflict with your own values. In other words, you can say, well, I believe in free speech, but I'm blocking you. You know what I mean? I mean, so, I really don't, I believe in my free speech is what a lot of people are saying, but I think you bring up a good point. I think moving forward, we just need to listen more. Probably not a bad, it's a great communication ability is to listen more.
And wouldn't it be fun though, if maybe you and I should start doing this with people that you would like to unfollow in real life. Can we make an announcement in real life? Like you do, like people on social media with me, it's like if they hate one of my Vikings takes, unfollow.
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing that I'm going to start doing that. You know what? Uncle Bob, I haven't really been into you for like 20 years. I'm unfollowing you in real life. Never going to talk to you at a family gathering ever.
But I'm going to take my like back first. I'm taking that like back. I'm going to unfollow you. But it is funny though. We're so impacted by our devices and social media that sometimes you even hear kids say LOL.
I do. I'll even give you the LMFAO sometimes. I'll hit you with or BRB.
It's always embarrassing when you have to ask somebody, you're not familiar with what that one little acronym is. And I'm like, dang it. All right. I don't have my phone with me. All right, Erica, what does this one mean? I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Well, hey, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to ask you a couple of questions. You have a very favorite trait, stoicism. You don't hear a lot of people use that one. Ironically, about 2 weeks ago, we had a guest that when I said, what trait really stands out to you? He said stoicism. And so aside from you two guys, you don't hear it a lot, but what does that mean to you? That, stoicism, to be stoic in your definition of it, what does that mean?
Yeah. So the best explanation that I've ever heard was from a podcast I did about 6 years ago with an author and sports psychology coach named George Mumford. I think I'm 90% sure his name is George Mumford. In fact, let me just make sure that because he put this in a way that I actually stopped and I said, wait a second. Yeah, George Mumford. And he wrote a book called Mindfulness. So he's a mindfulness performance expert. And I'll give you the real backstory in a second here. But yeah, you can, if you want to Google him, his name is George Mumford. He's 69 years old now, from Boston, Massachusetts. He's most famous for being the mental coach for Phil Jackson's basketball teams in the 90s and early 2000s. So he was the mental coach for the Michael Jordan Bulls teams and for the Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal Lakers teams. And he worked with Steve Kerr on those Bulls teams, et cetera. And so I asked him one time on a podcast, and I said, how do, in an arena with 20,000 streaming fans, it's game 6 of the playoffs or whatever it is, and you're tired, your heart's probably beating out of your chest, and you just got fouled, and the opposing fans are screaming at the top of their lungs, and you've shot free throws a million times, but like, how do great players collect themselves in those moments as humans and knock down those shots like it's an empty gym? And his answer, I'll never forget. And to me, he didn't use the word stoicism, but to me, it's a core principle of stoicism, which is the ability to control your emotions and reactions. Right. And he said, it's the ability to put space between the thing that happens and your response to it. The way he put it was, it's putting space between the stimulus and the response. The stimulus being a thing that happens, a thing that someone says, whatever it is, and then your response to whatever
Well,
happened.
I got two thoughts on that. One, that version, that definition of stoicism might be needed now more than ever, especially as you react to something on social media. People just fly off the handle. So putting that space in there is so critical. Two, it redefines a word that I think when people think of somebody as stoic, they think of this old stuffy guy that has no emotions.
Mm-mm.
He's very stoic.
No.
Well, but it actually is being able to have that balance between the incident and that emotional impact it has on you.
Yep. And the incident can be anything. Like it can be a car accident, which is traumatic. And I'm not saying that you should just remain stoic sitting in,
right.
But it could be anything. It could be a big life event. I mean, you've been told multiple times your wife has cancer, right? Like, and so you have to collect yourself and then figure out, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to be a husband? How do I, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But it can also be something as little as the stoplight malfunctioned and you're going to be 5 minutes late to your next thing, right? Well, you can freak out. I also read a lot of Eckhart Tolle books about mindfulness, and I really envy people, and I aspire to be even better in this space. People who can really, really master their emotions for the good, not to get rid of your emotions, but to be able to sort of pick and choose your emotions more than just being at the whim of what happens, right?
I agree. I think, when my wife, well, she, as Gina, and Gina, she's had multiple bouts of cardiac arrest. There's that ramp up where you get the call, then they tell you and you try and process it. The hardest one was when I came home from doing a coffee run and she passed away of cardiac arrest in front of me for 15 minutes. And if you're listening for the first time, she came back after the third hit with the defibrillator. But I think a lot of that, for me, that stoicism, if it's tied in there, you're taught that in the Marine Corps a lot. From they're constantly putting you in these situations where you have to keep your cool for the good of your platoon, or if you want to look at it from a business standpoint, the good of your team. There's always somebody else you have to think about. I refer to it as the power of who. We will do amazing things for our who, more than why we're doing something or what we're doing or even how we do it. If we can attach a who to it, we can stay more in control. But that kind of ties in with you have a pretty deep cliche that's one of your favorites I can let you say it, but it really does tie in with stoicism, the primary cause of unhappiness.
Oh, the primary cause of, I'm trying to think of now that I'm being put on the spot.
I know, like, unhappiness is never the situation.
If you're causing suffering for the people around you, essentially, if you're resisting the present moment.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
Resisting the present moment is causing stress and anxiety for people around you and yourself. And I would even add, this is my own, I just sort of made this up on our show one time, talking about expectations of Minnesota sports fans are here. The reality is they always come up short here. The gap between reality and expectations is where angst lies. And you can trace that back to almost anything, right? Well, my expectation is that I'm going to be on time. And the reality is I'm not. And so if I'm accepting in that, no, do better in the future to be on time. But like in that moment, if I am unaccepting of the fact that I am no longer on time, there's going to be angst, right?
There you go. I like that. I'm going to have to borrow that one.
And now I'm not a guy who shows up late a lot. So I'm just saying, like, don't use it as an excuse. Plan ahead. But,
that's right. Yeah. So let me ask you this then. What about like goals for the future? You're now working with all 8 markets in Hubbard Broadcasting. Will we see something similar for Score North in other markets? Is this in the
That would be fun. That would be fun. I mean, we're not most of what Hubbard has in its other markets and even in the Twin Cities is not sports content.
Right.
So now listen, if it were just me and I got the wheels to the car and I got the wheel and Dave Bessler and Ginny and Greg Strassel and listen, we're doing all kinds of sports stuff, and maybe we will do more sports content. Yeah. We do have a great station in St. Louis, 101 ESPN. They talk a ton of Cardinals, and they've got the Blues hockey team partnership on their station. So, it's been kind of fun helping them a little bit too, and just tapping into the smart people that work there. But it's a lot of music radio. It's a lot of, and music radio is in a fight. I mean, like we talked about earlier like music radio is still healthy now.
Yeah.
But it's the first time ever that the car is being infiltrated with a lot of competitors that didn't have access to it 10 years ago.
It was a solo drive before.
Yep. And so it's, it's no secret that music radio is definitely fighting for share of ear a lot more than it has in the past. And so we have to find new innovative ways to engage people where they consume, cycle them back to the core brand. And that's a lot of marketing speak right there. But
back to collaboration, right? It all comes full circle. Well, let me ask you this. Phil, you have done so many great things in the world of sports. Sports has seen so many shifts right now in the last couple of years. In the media world, and that's been shifting for many years now. And here you are leading the charge into a new era in sports and media combined. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the industry somebody works in, do you have any thoughts on something they can focus on, some key element that could help them as they strive for greatness in their own life or their own careers?
It's a really good question. I think it can be really daunting to think about the hill that you have to push a rock up when you think about the whole hill. I think if you can break whatever it is that you're trying to do into small segments, or pick a niche entrance into whatever it is, like, just if you can own one thing and be great at one thing, I think it opens doors, as opposed to if you're trying to do a lot of things at once. So
they got to break it. Maybe that applies overwhelming.
It's funny. I actually, I've been on LinkedIn for like 10 years, and I've always kind of viewed it as like, I've been really happy in my job. Like, I don't need to like be on LinkedIn very often. I'm in a good spot in my job. And then finally I realized, like, people are using LinkedIn as a social media platform to write, and you do it very well too, to put think pieces up and to start discussions. And so my wife has been urging me for the last few months, so you should be more active on LinkedIn. And there's just like, you could start discussions, and you could be a thought leader. And so I really just started doing that this week. And the article I posted on my LinkedIn account this week was just 3 pieces of advice for anyone looking to get into sports media. And one of them was start with a niche, dominate a niche first, be great at one thing first. If you're a consultant, pick an industry, right? If you're an athlete, what's the one thing? Be a great 3-point shooter. What's the one thing that you can be great at first? Be great at it, and then it builds confidence. It might build awareness of who you are and what you do, and then go from there. So that's probably the one thing, is just start with a smaller patch of real estate, dominate it, and then go from there.
I love that, because I think our hill seems bigger these days. Mm-hmm. With everything that's gone on in the pandemic, certainly challenges, even the smaller ones, can seem bigger than they are. Mm-hmm. Well, Phil, I just wanted to say thanks so much for being on the show today, sharing some of these insights. You're doing amazing things in the media side of things, the sports side, combining those. If somebody wants to follow what you're doing at ScoreNote, how can they find you? What's the best way to look up Phil Mackey and follow?
Yeah, well, you can follow just me personally on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, just /Phil Mackey, Instagram /Phil Mackey, Twitter, etc. The 2 YouTube channels, scorenorth.com is a hub. SKORnorth.com is a hub for everything that we do. All of our, videos, podcasts, written work, etc. So those are probably the best places. And then LinkedIn now. I'm hoping to post some more wisdom once in a while on LinkedIn and be a little more active. Very, very happy in my current work, so I'm not putting it out as a recruiting pitch, but if I just want to contribute to the growth of the industry. So
that's awesome. That's right. Well, now that you've announced your goal of doing more on LinkedIn, you've kind of committed yourself.
I know. We'll start with once a week. Once a week. We'll see where it goes from there.
Hey, thanks so much, Phil. I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate your friendship and all of your insights. You're awesome.
Nope. Thank you. You've been a huge help in my career and my growth. And so I appreciate everything. And I will leave the audience with 3 more nuggets from Erik Thurwinger, Phil Mackey discussions. And then I'll shut up. Achieve authenticity, be the beacon, and create camaraderie. The biggest drain on a company isn't the daily grind and the battles, it's the drama of the team. And there's a huge difference between issue-focused leaders and solution-focused leaders. Be a solution-focused leader.
Wow. Thank you, Phil. Love that. I appreciate you sharing those nuggets. It gets me fired up hearing them.
It's great
Hey,
stuff,
well, I
my friend.
wish you all the best in Seattle now that you're there, and looking forward to having you back on the show, my friend.
Sounds good. All right, Erik. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.